What's up, summoners? King Blair here. Today we're going to be talking about the current banner heroes Zahhak and Sigret, as well as next week's limited banner hero Fairy Tale Tenebria, and whether or not you should pull for them and which to pull for. So if you like the video, make sure you like, subscribe, and join the Discord server. Link down in the description. But without further ado, let's get right into it. As always, you guys know I like to make brackets of the different sections since these videos can get pretty long. So you want to skip to see a discussion on a particular unit, feel free to skip around. I will also do a summary right here at the beginning of each of the units so you get a good idea of what the video is about, as well as just a general overall thoughts on the units. But with that, let's get to a summary of even from where we're coming from. So we just came from a double collab, and we also did just come from Ran, a newer unit. So it's been a lot of bookmark drain in the past 2 months. It seems like they're slowing down a little bit, but not too much for newer players. If you haven't played in the last year and you didn't get Fairy Tale Tenebria last year, this is going to be Fairy Tale Tenebria's first ever rerun, and it has been a whole year since she was released, and she again is going to be limited. You guys know with limited heroes, you always do want to have a copy, but as always, I'll try to tell you guys what they do so you can make a better informed decision of what you want to do with Fairy Tale Tenebria, since maybe you really don't like her and you would prefer to save or get one of these other heroes. But with that, let's actually go to the summary of each of these heroes. So first, we have Zahhak and Sigret, who are not limited. So starting with Zahhak, he's going to be the newest addition, and he's going to be an incredibly good single target DPS, as well as pretty good meta relevant right now, mainly because he's able to reliably hit Violet, right? Especially when paired with something like Symbol of Unity, making him an amazing Guild Wars unit as people still transition out from their Violet defenses. The other part is because the way that he functions with the S3 being able to hit Violet, this means that he's also able to hit fire units reliably with the increased hit chance on his S3, making him a really just overall good single target DPS, even though he does have the Earth element. Now, he also does have a pretty good matchup into things like a Ravi, because the S3 does apply injury up to 35%, which is the highest single target injury that we have seen to date, which means that if you hit a Ravi with this, a 20k HP a Ravi is going to be from being a 20k HP a Ravi to being about like a 1300 HP a Ravi, which again, that cuts her damage by a lot and also makes it significantly easier for you to one-shot her in follow-up turns with your Zahhak. Right, so extremely good single target DPS, very meta relevant, and overall just a very solid unit. On the other hand, we have Sigret, who's going to be a early beginner type unit. The further you are in the game, the less value that she has. Her biggest role is going to be for Wyvern, and if you're pulling for her, it's because of Wyvern 13. If you already do Wyvern 13, you don't really need her unless you really want to do a one-shot. Although if you have Strawset, you can already do that one-shot without Sigret. And there are one-shot-esque comps that don't use Sigret. So she's not a must-have hero, but she's going to be the easiest one to actually do the one-shot teams with because of how high her water damage actually is and her single target damage is. She can be used for Guild Wars early on, but definitely falls off very hard later on. Can still use her if you really want to, because she does have decent single target damage, but it just gets significantly harder to use the later you go up the brackets, especially in Arena. But still, for Guild Wars, always an option. So as far as these two, Zahhak, if you have the bookmarks for it, he's a really good pickup. He's just an amazing single target damage hero, and definitely a good pickup if you have the bookmarks for it. Again, really solid hero. He's not limited, so it's not the end of the world if you don't get him. There's a chance you'll get him in the future when he gets a rerun. Sigret, again, same thing. If you're not early game, you ideally started with this unit when you were early game, because that way you already have her for transitioning. If not, if you don't want her and you rather save bookmarks, Alexa does a really good job of doing pretty fast Wyvern runs. She just can't transition to a one-shot type team, so it's not as necessary for you to have Sigret, although she definitely is extremely helpful and makes it significantly easier to do Wyvern 13. But again, not a must-have. There are other options for you out there. So again, it depends on how easy you want Wyvern to be or how much you want a one-shot type team composition, assuming you have the other key pieces of that. But now, as far as Fairy Tale Tenebria, who's also going to be the unit that we're going to be talking about next. As always, you guys know I like for you to keep a limited copy, at least one of them, because you never know how the meta is going to change over the course of the year. You never know what units are going to be released, and you never know how your tastes are going to change. And with Fairy Tale Tenebria, this is her first rerun. It's been a whole year since she saw a rerun, which means that if you didn't have her this whole year and you wanted to use her, you didn't have access to her. So again, it's always nice to have one copy, but what does she do so you get a better idea? She's going to be primarily a control unit, almost solely going to be PvP because of the fact, and almost solely going to be RTA and Arena because of the way that her kit works. Essentially, her S3 is going to be a 1 buff strip that also sets up redirect provoke and unable to be buffed, but it only strips one buff, and she's able to follow up with shuffle to be applied to be able to apply some nasty debuffs. The big thing with Fairy Tale Tenebria is that a lot of people have chosen to use AOL over her because of AOL's ability to cycle quicker as well as to strip 2 buffs, whereas Fairy Tail has a bit more counters. Does not mean that Fairy Tail is useless. She's still an amazing last pick unit, because if they don't have answers to Fairy Tail Tenebria, they have to ban her. Extremely potent unit at what she does. So now that we went over the summary, let's actually go into in-depth of each of the units, starting with, of course, Fairy Tail Tenebria, since we are already here. Well, as far as stat lines, she's going to be very standard mage stat lines. Solid HP, solid defense, pretty good speed for an initiator, some effectiveness, some FRS, nothing too crazy, right? Pretty standard. Her awakening is going to be effectiveness. You can actually imprint her with Tenebria, regular Tenebria, as well as Spectre Tenebria if you have multiple dupes of Spectre Tenebria. You can actually imprint Fairy Tail Tenebria and give her more effectiveness, which basically is what she needs because her whole kit revolves around that. As far as kit, her S1 really doesn't do too much. It's just a chance to apply poison, but again, those poisons can go a long way. If you do land both, that is 10% damage, right? It's just very low chance of actually landing. The nice part is, since she is able to actually soul burn and get an extra turn to be able to cycle her S3 quicker. So again, not the craziest S1 in the world, not super strong, but I mean, it can be pretty annoying at the right situation, especially if you land both poisons. As far as this S2, I'll talk about it right after the S3. The S3, by the way, one of my favorite animations, although I started hating it because of how often she used to be picked. Man, this skill, it brings back not so great memories, but the big thing that it's going to do is it dispels one buff and applies redirect provoke and unable to be buffed. Redirect provoke, making it attack the highest health hero. You can do some really cool wombo combos with this. If Violet is your highest HP hero, they will focus down Violet. If General Purge is your highest HP hero, they will focus General Purge down. Imo Ken, right? There should be a lot of really cool combinations that you could do with Fairy Tail Tenebria, and you still can, and it's always super cool to see them, as well as just being really nice. Again, really solid skill, sets up provoke and unable to be buffed. Unlike Angel Light Angelica, this skill does hit the target, meaning Violet will easily dodge it, and since it only strips one buff, if they're able to set up another buff before you or bring a Fallen Cecilia, you will not be able to strip their immunity reliably. So that is something to keep in mind when using Fairy Tail Tenebria. The other part though is going to be DS2, that whenever a unit is provoked once per turn, you will activate Shuffle, which is an AoE attack that applies a random debuff, and all the random debuffs are super punishing. You have silence, decreased defense, and the worst one probably being the unhealable, but it can sometimes function in the right situation. But again, really nasty debuffs. It is only one per turn, so you typically do want to follow up shortly after they go to be able to execute some of the targets. And if they're provoked, you do a little bit extra true damage based on their health. But the big part that makes Fairy Tail Tenebria be really annoying is when she's paired with something like Abyssal Crown, because as we see here, this is one AoE that strips them. Really good chance for one crown to trigger. If a crown triggers, they're stunned, provoked, unable to be buffed, and then you get the other chance to proc crown off of the shuffle. If you get the shuffle off, you're able to set up into some nasty debuffs. This does make it so she has a pretty good matchup into things like Angel and Angelica. Why? If you're able to land the debuffs in Angel and Angelica will cleanse the cannot be buffed, but she will not cleanse the provoke, which means that you will get a follow-up shuffle against them and be able to land the debuffs against them and be able to cleave with them. So again, not a bad option if you're trying to actually cleave with her against AOL, right? It can work in Arena, and I have seen people actually use her in Arena for that purpose because of the shuffle and the potential to stun, right? The other part is primarily in RTA, you're going to see her as a speed contest opener or just an opener overall. This means that since she only has to build effectiveness and speed, it is very easy to make her very fast with immunity, right? The only problem is with things like Rimuru. If you give her immunity, Rimuru will be able to cut you, especially not good if you... It's just not good if you miss on Rimuru, right? So definitely Rimuru making it a little bit harder for her to do her job if you give her immunity. So typically, you probably won't give her immunity anymore. And most openers don't have immunity anymore. But typically, 270 to 290 speed is where you ideally want your Fairy Tail Tenebria to be able to open before the opponent, set up some nasty debuffs, and go on her merry way and allow you to just finish off the opponent with all the debuffs that you have. Again, things like Mediator, Cowrick definitely have made her a lot weaker. And a lot of other heroes out there that also do similar jobs like her, like Angel Light Angelica. How made her not be as meta, but that's still, she's still like really punishing last pick option in RTA, where if they don't have an answer to her, they're forced to ban her, right? So really solid unit. I still think she has so much potential. It's just people rather play with newer toys, as well as it's harder to use her because she has to be last picked. So now that brings us to the other unit, who is going to be Sigret. But again, for Fairy Tale Tenebria, if you can't pull her, she's limited unit. She's not going to come back for another year, and you have no idea how everything's going to change in the future. But now, as far as Sigret, again, she's going to be primarily a Wyvern unit, and I have talked about her a lot before, so we'll quickly go over her skills. Stat lines don't matter too much, but she does get some help from crit rate as well as crit damage, which is always nice. Really solid attack, not so great defensive stats, but it doesn't matter because you're not using her to be a tank, right? And her exclusive equipment does give her more attack. Also gives her a higher chance to do more damage with S1, with S2, and also have a higher chance to inflict bleeding when you're using your S2. Alright, never mind. I think that is the S1. Yeah, that's the S1. So you can get better S1 damage. You can get higher chance to apply bleed, which is actually a really good artifact for Wyvern if you need to land debuffs. Definitely a good artifact to have. And then Smash, of course, is the big reason why she's actually able to be a monster at Wyvern, because you can lower down the health that this will trigger by to 75%, meaning she will use the skill and follow up with an S1 more reliably in Wyvern, making it easier for you to do more damage to the Wyvern. So now let's actually look over the skill, and of course the imprint is more attack. So as far as looking over at the skills, sorry if I fumbled my words there a little bit, but look at the skills a little bit more. The S1 applies bleeding and does decent damage. Why is it so good? Wyvern 13 requires you to apply debuffs, right? The more units that you have that apply debuffs, the better, because it makes your runs more consistent, which makes Sigret a really good candidate. Again, Alexa does also apply poisons. So again, they're both really solid options for Wyvern. Both do a lot of damage, but Sigret's, again, really good option because of S1. S2, the one that people usually do put the EE on, does make this go from 50% to trigger down to 75% chance, 70% or below to trigger, which is really good because it makes it easier to trigger condition, which allows you to go into another S1, which lets you put more debuffs, making it more consistent, and also lets you do more damage, especially when put with something like Daydream Joker. That's essentially 6% damage that you're doing to the boss guaranteed off of one S1, on top of all the damage that this skill actually does. And of course, it does apply on healable and bleeding. You can give it the artifact to get even more bleeding on top of that, to again put more debuffs on the boss if you are struggling with the boss. But again, you won't see it here, but if you drop it enough, she will follow up with an S1. Really cool to watch. It's actually, I love her animations. And then of course the S3, the thing that actually makes her really good at one-shotting. She gets a raw penetrate defense by 30% and 10% for every debuff inflicted on the enemy. This means against a Wyvern, if you have decreased defense and you have another buff, that's already a lot of penetration that you're doing right there. You're melting that Wyvern. You're doing dummy damage to that Wyvern. You're going to be killing it quite easily because of how much damage this skill is going to do. It does also have an added extinction benefit from the olden days where RB used to be everywhere. Nowadays, it's not as impactful. It doesn't really add too much to her kit, but does allow her to still do things in Guild Wars if you need someone for extinction, which can be nice for earlier game players that don't have ways to deal with Arbiter Vildred or with revive compositions, right, in Arena and Guild Wars, because again, she does have that extinction on the S3. So overall, how would you build her? Usually you want to get her the 65% effectiveness required for Wyvern to actually be able to let her debuffs at the highest percentage, and then everything else is usually just attack. The speed only needed if you don't have a General Purgus. If you don't have a General Purgus for Wyvern, you will want to have with some speed on her so she can actually take turns in between the Wyvern. But if you have a General Purgus, you can just build her full attack and she will do her job on Wyvern very reliably. For one shot, it would be pure damage on rage set. No need particularly to put the... you can put the effectiveness still. I would have double checked for the Wyvern one shots, but again, mostly damage and the effectiveness threshold, right? So again, nothing too bad, nothing too crazy. Really good Wyvern unit, which does mean a lot because Wyvern is a very big part of this game, but not the end of the world if you don't have her. As I mentioned, Alexa can replace her for most purposes, with the exception of the Wyvern one-shot. I personally don't think, if you can already clear Wyvern 13 at a pretty nice pace, I don't think it's worth it unless you really want that one-shot Wyvern. And you have the units to actually make it work, like the Sinful Angelica, the Flan/Karen, and the Seaside Bellona. Seaside Bellona being the more important one. But now that takes us to the last, but definitely not least unit, Zahhak, who is the newest addition to the game. So as far as stat line, Zahhak sports a very impressive stat line with pretty solid attack, not the greatest defensive stats, but amazing speed and crit rate, right? 119 is a really solid speed starting stat line for a DPS, and he gets a lot of help on the crit rate department, especially from his actual skills. He functionally has 77% crit when you take into consideration the passives that his skills have, meaning you only really need to give him 23% crit rate, which is extremely easy to do, which is the reason why you can actually get such insanely high statted Zahhaks. So as far as imprint, it is going to be attack, which again, always nice, more damage. And the imprint for the team is defense, which again, can be nice to make some units a lot tankier. But now looking at the actual skills and what he can do, his S1 has ridiculous ratios. Oh, by the way, amazing design. I love it. The movements are so smooth. Man, look at this S1 animation. Like the way that he has a really cool S1. And that S1 has insanely high ratios. Why? It essentially functions as Kisa's S1. Why? Damage stealth increases when the target is buffed. And there are a lot of buffs in this game. And you can soul burn it for even more damage. If you've ever seen Kisa, she does dummy damage on S1 when she soul burns it. Zahhak is no different. The thing is, Zahhak's skill also gives him a base 50% crit chance when attacking. That means that you are getting so much free stats from all your skills, making him easier to get higher damage than Kisa, because of how much damage you can actually give him, since his skills already have so much crit rate. This does make him be a very strong menace for doing single target damage, and it does give him some potential for PvE, since none of his S1 or S3 actually apply debuffs, which means you can't actually use bossing with it. The other part is going to be the S2, which feels really odd for his kit, because it said cleanse and grants a barrier. It's really weird because he's mostly a damage dealer, but he has some support. You can't actually do this, and you can't get a barrier as well as CR push, allowing you to actually cycle, which, I mean, at the end of the day, if you need that cleanse, it can come a long way. The other part that's weird is that he's a DPS hero, but the barrier is based on the target's max health. So it's one of those things that's like, kind of makes you scratch your head why it's not based on his attack. But I guess they wanted to also give him a potential for a bruiser build. So again, he can get cycling with this. He can apply barriers, which can be nice, and it can let you survive, as well as dispelling those debuffs, which a lot of times can be very useful if you have unable to be buffed to actually take that off, or things like provoke, right? So very solid skill to use in the right situation, and the cycling does make it nice to cycle back to your S3 quicker. And of course, the S3 is going to be your bread and butter, and the reason why you would even pull for him, because this skill not only inflicts injuries, right, up to 35% injuries, right, incredibly high injury, which is why he's so good into bruisers, but also gives him invincibility, and also has increased hit chance as well as crit rate by 50%. If you give him Symbol of Unity, he has a 70% hit chance increase, which means you're guaranteed to hit Rylet with Moonlight Dreamblade or Shepherd the Hollow, and you're guaranteed to hit any Violet on this planet, right? Even if they have max Violet stacks, unless even if they have it with Assassin Cartuja, you can still hit Violet if you get put him on Symbol of Unity, right? Which is really, really nice for him. Allows him to do insane amount of single target damage and do a bunch of damage and get a follow-up turn, which is so important nowadays for DPSs. If a DPS doesn't get a follow-up turn, it is extremely difficult for them to function, and he's actually able to get that guaranteed extra turn because of the invincibility, allowing him to make use of his very strong S1 damage, very similar to Strasset. And again, with S3, because it applies so much injury, it does make him a really good unit into bruisers such as a Ravi, since you're able to apply these injuries and make it very hard for them to heal and do damage based on health. As first how you would build them, speed penetration set would be best for him. You do want him taking turn 1 to set up invincibility, as well as to take out a problem unit or set up the injuries for him. Really, really solid if you do speed penetration. You can also make him counter set, since his S1 does have good ratios. Although it's a little weird for him since his base defensive stats are not the greatest. It can also work if you do so choose. The things you have to watch out for: Fallen Cecilia with all different heroes like this is a big counter to you, because if you're not doing the damage, you're not getting the injury, you're not winning the game, right? Or you're not killing that bruiser, right? So Fallen Cecilia, definitely a good counter, although your S1 can actually melt through the shield, so not the hardest counter on the planet. Anything that outspeeds you, gonna probably not be too great for you, right? If you get outsped, you lose because you're gonna be squishy, so make sure that you're not getting outsped either, or you will run a risk of dying, right? that's going to be the big ones, running the risk of getting outsped, as well as units that can strip your invincibility and kill you the follow-up turn for a 1-for-1. Ideally, you want to get a one-shot and get a S1, but if they're able to strip you and not let you set up, that's where the problem lies on his kit. But Rome, as always, you need to have counters, and he does have his counters, but just a very solid single target damage hero overall. So let's go to conclude all the units. Overall, if you had to pick the heroes, as far as priority, I would say Fairy Tale Tenebria and Zahhak depends on your playstyle, with Fairy Tale Tenebria having a slight edge just because she is limited, right? You don't have access to her in the future for at least a year, which again, it's always nice to have a unit because you don't know when you're going to be using her, but it is important to note that she is not seeing a ton of play right now, but that can change in the blink of an eye, right? And Zahhak would be the second priority because he's actually a really solid single target DPS. If you already have a lot of single target DPS and you don't play that playstyle, you don't need him, but he does help a lot with Violet. So if you struggle with Violet, definitely pick him up. And then Sigret, probably lowest on the list. Only really there if you really need Wyvern one-shot easier, but there's so many different options for you for Wyvern 13 that even though she does make it easier, it's not the end of the world if you don't have her. Unless you're very early on in the game, then she actually does have a lot of value for you. Later on, she loses value a lot. But that's all I got for you guys today, and I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time. Peace.